So first of all, Mary, you've been in Australia, in the UK now for 10 days, is it?
10 days, I think it is, yes. Yeah.
Tell me, how have you found the people of the North East, the people of Northumbria? Are they what you expected? Are they different? Give me some reaction as to the not the landscape or the
not
buildings,
the landscape,
but
just the people. Yeah. Well, they're not at all what I expected. I mean, I expected people who were like the people who came to Australia, of course, on the first leg of the research project. But overall, I expected this idea I have in my mind of English people. Now, not just the ones that you see on the, drama and various shows on television, but an old idea of English people as, of course, part of colonialism, history, and again, sort of their counterparts in modern day dramas and so on and so on. But above all, I expected an idea of English people that were cool, not necessarily all posh speaking and things like that, but sort of a bit on the cool, cold side. I don't know how you pronounce that, but a bit distant, I suppose, especially from people from other cultures. In the northeast, this is not at all what I found, actually, to my surprise and, happiness. I found that was fantastic. They're warm. All the people I've met so far, and of course the people I knew who came, the group, the Geordie group who came to Australia, all their families, their own friends, but everybody in this particular part of the north, very warm, very inviting, very friendly, not at all distant.
Okay, so has that changed your concept of what English people are, what Englishness is?
Well, it is changing. It's in the process of changing, I must say. Pardon me. I'm still, like, for example, we went to a conference the other day talking about a range of things. I went with some of the Geordie Mob members, and so there were all kinds of English people there with a whole range of different accents, which I sort of didn't recognise really, but I could hear the differences, many differences, and that was an eye-opener, and I think that's probably one of the key things about the people, English people for me, is how is it that how did that happen? And it is all interesting. It makes me think about things like the areas that they came from or come from. Those accents, are they part of a whole different language group like it is for Aboriginal Australians? And then I think about English-speaking people, white people in Australia too, who have a a sort of sameness about their accent. Yeah, very different Australian accent, of course, and very different. You can tell a slight difference between, say, Queenslanders and Southerners, but nowhere near as pronounced as the differences in accents here. And that makes me think about the people themselves too, their characters and their, who they are, what their identities are.
So essentially, are you saying in a way that there's no such thing as Englishness?
Well, it seems there's no one idea of Englishness. Yeah, and that's a kind of surprise to me. I mean, in a sense, I've always known just from movies, films, and TV and so on. I knew about those accents, but when you're here and you're hearing it, and you're meeting them, and of course people are different everywhere. They're in themselves anyway, characters, personalities. There seems to be a range of Englishness. I still don't know what it means. Just from, of course, only 2 weeks, I don't know what it means to be English. And of course, when I do, wonder about that, I wonder about it. I talk to, of course, English people, the Geordie Mob and others, and I get generally different kinds of answers, not vastly different, but sort of different answers. Does it mean to be English? What is English identity? And I'm understanding that an English identity, of course, is English. Like the north of here, this border is to Scottishness, accents, and of course other places, Welsh, Wales. But just within England itself, it's like many countries. It just seems like that to me, and that really it's something to think about, because in our country, that is Aboriginal country, there are lots of countries. There are, and people are very close to their identity, identifying with their own particular locality. And oddly enough, that's what I'm finding here. I still don't know why it's odd, but I'm finding out.
So, in terms of locality, on the first day that I came to meet you while you were here, we did this little tour with Tom's dad of various places that people live in Newcastle, where he had lived as a boy.
Yes.
And we also saw, I think, the demise of the ship industry that was in Newcastle. Did any of that surprise you? Is that what you expected? Because when we were in Australia, you took us around an hour.
Yes,
we were all saying, what a lovely place this is.
Yes.
So has it surprised you, the kind of the housing stock over here and the stuff that Tom showed you?
The tour with Tom was a real eye-opener in many ways. The first obvious one was his story, of course. His growing up, where he was born, and his growing up, and the kind of place that building was, which is now a student's lodging place, I think, and his description of it came to life. Just, as he was talking about it, describing it, very, very moving. I was very moved. We all were, actually. It's like something out of Dickens. And the place he described, the description of that building then, was like something out of Dickens. And he's talking about the 1940s, was it? The 50s, I think it was. 1950s, it was very different. I suppose, when I say very different, wasn't it all that different for a lot of Aboriginal people who are still living in poverty in the 1950s, terrible poverty, real, in riverbeds and things like that, that sort of, almost like third world poverty, I suppose. But I remember growing up myself in my own family home, and it was a big old house with quite a few rooms. It was like half of a previously big house, but it was, quite nice. Gardens, big trees around, grass to play on, and so on and so on. A wood stove, just electricity, but water all the time, fresh water, plenty to eat. Very different, just for myself personally, very different from what Tom was describing, and I was a child in the 50s.
So tell me a little bit about your reaction to the Woodhorn Museum and finding out about how miners lived.
Well, the Woodhorn Museum was that was another eye-opener for a lot of different reasons, I suppose, though, too. That's the funny thing, between Tom's story and the Woodhorn Museum, lots of aspects seem to me to be very Victorian. Very Victorian, that a Victorian kind of way of life and thinking, especially on the part of people in power, that came through clearly, how they treated ordinary people. And it's funny because it's not funny, it's funny, strange, I suppose, because you think of that sort of life and that sort of thinking as being in the Victorian times, Dickens and so on. Not in the 1950s and 40s and 50s and 60s. That was a shock, actually, that it was still kind of going on. Not probably to the extreme of the Dickens time, but harsh, harsh, and absolutely no autonomy of people, his people, and they could be treated any way they wanted,
And do you think from that visit you also got a sense of why a community built up around an industry?
It is a very strong community, and it just seems to me that with it seemed to me, and I think I've heard this a couple of explanations from different Geordie people that the whole beginning of industrialisation swept people up in their like totally took over their lives. So the decisions, the plans, the constructions of the people who really, the individuals and families, powerful families who pushed industrialisation, kind of totally dominated ordinary people's lives. But in order to survive, they had to find resilience, not just while they were working, but even almost like before the whole process started. And it just seems like as if that made people really, really strong in incredible ways. You know, not just within their families, with their relations with each other, but also even with their relations with the, for want of a better word, the bosses. You know, the owners, the bosses, and so on and so on. So, and when I say strong, I don't mean in the sense of, because I don't reckon that's necessarily really strong to suddenly have a revolution or and so on, but to be strong in yourself, to do what needs to be done, to stay going strong in a job in order to look after your family. I understand that really well. A lot of our own old people, Aboriginal people, had to do that. You know, when there was no what do you call it, benefits or anything like that, they had to keep working hard, even go against their own sense of being Aboriginal, like, for example, clearing the land, ring barking they used to call it. They had to clear land, chop down trees. I don't know what that did to them spiritually, but it must have been damaging. Likewise, I imagine, well, I can see and I've heard on some of the stories in the Woodhorn Museum, on videos, how people had to really strengthen themselves to work in unbelievable conditions. I'd heard about how people were treated in the mines, and children, young people, and so on. And when you see it up close, if only in historical kind of records and resources and so on, it's still amazing how someone can treat someone like that. You know, bosses can treat people like that. What do they call it? Laissez-faire capitalism or something. But so, in other words, you can treat people however you like, and it's all kind of okay. And that kind of cruelty, which is the same kind of cruelty that visited our mob, is hard to understand. You know?
So do you think, in a way, that you've seen, although the mining communities around here have had a very different history to Aboriginal communities,
yes,
do you think they've arrived at a similar point in terms of how they now deal with what's going on in society and how they identify themselves?
It is sort of similar. It is. How do people, you know, when people are born, you're an autonomous individual, really. You grow into a family, and depending on the circumstances of the family and class, all that sort of thing, poverty, rich, whatever, that determines a whole lot of things. But it just seems like in both sets of people, our autonomy has been not only denied and trampled on, but is actually in the control of others all the time, you know. And while life might be getting a bit easier now, really stupid policies continue to make inroads into our well-being, both here and in Australia. It's terrible. It's the inroads into well-being there are just constant and relentless. They are relentless and in-your-face kind of things. So some of the things that it seems like both peoples are talking about is how to try to regain at least some autonomy while fighting this encroaching kind of what is called austerity policies here and in Australia. How do we kind of prepare ourselves for that kind of fight in a really good way, which maintains our own sense of well-being?
We went to the Discovery Museum. We went down into the bowels of the earth.
Yes.
To see Aboriginal artefacts.
Yeah.
I'm interested to know how that made you feel.
When we went to the Discovery Museum, I I think I've only ever been to a museum, even in Australia, about twice, I think, you know. And once at a university. That's right, the other time at a university. When I went to something called a Discovery Museum, and I'd heard that there were artefacts there, but not remains. In a way, I was sort of grateful because I didn't really want to see remains anyway. I'm here, we're here with an expert in return of remains, Bob Weatherall. He is a foremost Aboriginal expert in Australia. He's been working in the area for many years, and that was really his spot. You know, his expertise in that museum. But it was a strange feeling to go down, down and down. I don't know why it's always at the bottom. Why isn't it at the top? Or, you know, just on the ground floor. But way down and talking to the young person in charge of that particular area, all the artefacts that from around the world. Although he himself said that he was only mainly in charge of classic history, I think, Roman and Greek and so on. But he gave a whole lot of good information. I was surprised to hear him talking, and I thought to myself, I shouldn't be surprised. But I was surprised that face to face, listening to him talk, and he was a lovely young man, you know, nice man, talking in such a matter-of-fact way about having had other people's artefacts and belongings and historical goods, you know, as if that it's quite right that a place like a museum, any place like a museum or keeping place, they should have that right. You know, I was just surprised. There was no idea that we should be, well, not even sorry, that would be perhaps too much, you know, but at least a bit thoughtful about, you know, is this the main occupation of museums, is to be kind of like a keeper of everyone else's, not just their own, but other people's cultural history, aspects of cultural history.
Because actually there was a definite contrast in a way between the wood horn and the discovery.
Yes, that's right. The wood horn is people keeping their own history. They own it. It's part of them, part of their, if I can say, blood, sweat and tears, you know. But there in Discovery, and they do a good job in the curating and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure. It looked like it anyway. But the idea that the history of the peoples, collectives, you know, individuals, activities and so on, is the responsibility only of other people who are experts in this area, historians, archaeologists, anthropologists and so on and so on. It was quite clear, and it was just said as such, you know, that there was no questioning of that, you know, and that surprised me in 2015, that they don't seem to have moved beyond that. But I guess I'm saying that, I mean, you could say that about just a whole vast array of museums still going. They don't know how to get out of old ways of being museums, I suppose. And I have heard some good things from other museums, all kinds, trying to present life and history and peoples in a different way, in a more, you know, an actual living, breathing way. Yeah, and that's good if they are. It really does show a kind of fundamental misunderstanding of how to treat those artefacts, those goods in the first place. And by doing that, though, too, they're actually acknowledging in a way that the misunderstanding and mistreatment, of course, of the people who actually own those things can just carry on regardless too, you know. Not even thinking of like that it's not just that it's the right thing to do to give back to what people own, other people own. Like, for example, I just had to say, I'm sorry, I wasn't angry or anything like that. I had to mention about the Elgin marbles, you know, that the English that should give those things back, terribly valuable to the country that's been asking for them, actually just simply asking and demanding, but not declaring war or anything like that. They just want them back. They are owned by that country.
On a completely different subject, have you come across strong women in the northeast?
I have come across the strongest women, and that is a wonderful, wonderful. I must say it's not a surprise, because again, without understanding the differences within England itself between different localities, my first impression of an English woman, of course, is like for many people outside the country from other places, is Boudica, who fights back, a great warrior queen, fights back against the Roman invasion and so on, and gets terribly punished, badly punished. So I've always had this notion of, there's this part of English women who was like that. And then when I met the Geordie mob who came over there, I could certainly see, in the two ladies who came, they're definitely strong people, very strong people, very
and
naturally strong.
And in some ways at the centre of the community.
Yeah, that's what I found, actually. I found that now coming here. Even though we've been here only about not quite 2 weeks even, it seems like they really are. But I do think, though, that women, like with our community, Aboriginal community, women are the central kind of powerhouse. So in a way, I'm not really surprised that women here, that strong women will become the powerhouse. That they either are or becoming the powerhouse of their communities. It just seems like that. It seems a natural progression.
Okay.
I think both communities really have a range of strengths within them that will make actually working together now and in future in different ways a very good thing. It's not just a good thing in itself, but it's like we're acting out or practicing a concept that is a very Aboriginal concept actually, of that relations or relationships are far more important than notions or concepts of survivalism. Survivalism is an idea that where we're competing, where it's a competitiveness as to who can survive, and how do you survive? You survive by competing. Here, it seems like, from what I've seen, and hopefully it will continue, is that we're establishing good relations. Essentially, we're establishing good relations, and that is a very good way of having longevity in partnership, in good society, good culture. All the positive things can sort of start to be worked out, practiced, worked through even in conflict. If we establish those sorts of solid, what we would call congenial fellowship. Aboriginal people, they have this notion of congenial fellowship, where people simply get together, they talk, they work together, but above all they just talk and discuss, and they get so used to each other's company. And there might be some arguments involved in it too, but we construct friendship. So the idea of that friendship is kind of a random thing. Oh well, if we hit it off, we do, and if we don't, we don't, and so on. But our Murri idea is that you actually work and construct friendship and partnership and relationality. We have come into a community, I have, and all of our mob have come into a community that just seems to have this notion, which is, we would say it's our notion, that it's the same notion, really. And of course, some people might say that, oh well, why be surprised at that? Might be a lot of communities have the same notion, But we have, heard it, found it, are engaging with each other in that exactly same way. So it is a constructed thing, friendship. You put your effort into it, you think about it, you solve differences, and that is what has happened, actually, too. We had a small difference. We've worked through that very quickly, and I don't know. I have a very good feeling about the future for the relationship between each other. Who knows how broad it will become or how long it will last. But the potential is there, and that's it's not all that we can hope for, but I guess it's a wonderful start. It's a wonderful start.